everybody. We are so excited to be with you. Keila and I are here, and this is the kickoff for our For Everyone Always series, and we are the first video. And so we're super excited about it, and today we're going to talk about a specific passage. Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, we've been going through devotional books. We've been talking on Sundays, going through the first few chapters. And so at our first Lifegroup session, we are in Luke chapter 7. Mm-hmm. And we've got two stories that we're really talking about, right, Manny?
Correct.
And so we're going to talk about the first one and just some principles that we can take. And really, I think when you and I were talking, one of the things that we were really impressed by was Jesus's emotions through these two stories and how we can relate to them and learn from them. And so obviously in verse 1 through 10, we have the story of the Roman centurion. And it says, when Jesus had finished saying all this to the people, he entered Capernaum. There, a centurion servant whom his master valued highly was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some of the elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, "This man deserves to have you do this because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." So Jesus went with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. That is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. And turning to the crowd following him, he said, "I tell you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel." Then the men who had been sent returned to the house and found the servant well. So what's the big highlight of this story? What makes this story so incredible?
Yeah, well, I think there's a few. To name one, and it's a big one. He's a Roman centurion, right? Mm-hmm. What does that mean? A Roman centurion is obviously he works for the government of Rome, and to be a centurion, you would have had to work up through the army. So in those times, if you're a centurion, you're overseeing probably about 100 soldiers, mm-hmm. and if you went to battle, you were leading those 100 soldiers in battle. So first, that he's Roman, so he's not a Jew, he's a Gentile, right? And that he was a leader. And so we could obviously see from this passage that he says, "I lead, many soldiers. And when I say go, they go. When I say come, they come." And then we kind of see that Jesus feels this emotion of being amazed, and he's amazed by his faith, right?
Well, I think the other thing to add is that Roman centurions were notoriously hated and feared by the Jews.
Correct,
so they were not friendly with the
mm-hmm.
Jews. And so it would have been so out of the norm for a Roman centurion to even be able to acknowledge that Jesus could heal. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like he has this change of mind when he wants Jesus to come to his house, but then he sends people to him and he says, "Actually, I'm not even worthy for you to come to my house. If you just speak the word, I know that you can heal him." And yeah, that's the emotion that we were really just blessed by. Is it says that Jesus was amazed, mm-hmm. turns to his followers and says, "I have not seen a faith like this in all of Israel." And it's just incredible to me that Jesus could be impressed or blessed by the faith of a Roman.
Yeah. Well, and it reminds us, we were talking about having a childlike faith, right? Mm-hmm. And most likely this Roman centurion had not been following Jesus for very long, mm-hmm. right? And so we know that the Bible says a couple of times, and Jesus even says in some of the Gospels, "Come to me with a childlike faith." Mm-hmm. And why is that, right? We talked about, why
our own kids.
Correct.
Yeah.
We talked about what is a childlike faith? Well, let's relate it to our kids. Whatever we tell them, they typically will believe. Like if I tell them I'm the strongest man in the world, they're going to believe it, right? And I think, having a childlike faith is something that Jesus really wants from us. Why? Because that first love feeling where it's the strongest, it pulls the most.
And you believe what he says.
And you really believe what he says. Yeah. And it's incredible because you said it right, where to have a faith that Jesus is impressed with stands out to me, because even if you've been following Jesus for 5 minutes or 50 years, right, you don't have to have been raised in the faith, to have a big faith. And that's kind of what really we see in this specific passage. But you talked about, the Jesus' emotions and kind of how that ties into the next part.
Yeah, I think it's just amazing that Jesus could be impressed and just taken aback by the faith of someone and just his humanity expressed in that moment. And I think it translates over to the next story where we see another emotion that Jesus feels and acts upon, and that is the emotion of compassion in the second story.
Yeah, and that story is in the second half of the passage found in verses 11 through 17. Let's go ahead and read those. It says, soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. As he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the town was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said to her, don't cry. Then he went up and touched the bier that they were carrying on him, and the bearers stood still. He said, young man, I say to you, get up. The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. They were all filled with awe and praised God. A great prophet has appeared among us, they said. God has come to help his people. This news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country. It's wild, right? As I was kind of doing a little bit of research on this specific passage, I noticed, the town Nain, and that's how you say it. But I noticed that I never saw it anywhere else. So I was doing some research to some of the commentary and said this town was probably the only time. This instance was probably the only time that Jesus ever went to this town. And you can kind of see it when they called him a great prophet has appeared among us, right? So in this specific story, there's a few things that we can pull out. Obviously, Jesus was new to this town, so they didn't necessarily know him. He went up to a mother that was crying.
In the middle of a funeral procession.
In the middle of a funeral procession.
Like they're taking the body.
Correct, yeah. And he says, don't cry. How odd is that, right?
Yeah.
Telling a mother don't cry at her son's funeral. And so that would have probably caught people off guard when he told the mother don't cry. And then he reaches over and touches the boy in the casket, which back in those times would show it was not honorable to do that because it would have meant that they were unclean, right? So Jesus kind of does some things that would have thrown the crowd off, and then he performs the miracle. Yeah,
and I think to me, the miracle before he even raises him from the dead is, it says there that when he saw her, his heart went out to her. And there's other translations that say he was filled with compassion. And I think one of the things that we talked about that's so amazing in this story is that Jesus met this woman's need without her ever having asked for it, right? The loss of her son, it was obviously devastating, but it also meant that if she was a widow and this was her son, she was not just losing her son, she was probably losing her hope for provision and financial security, the family name being carried on. There was so much that was at stake here. And Jesus sees her and he's filled with compassion and he walks over and he knew her need before she even asked for it, and then did this miracle. And then the very last passage, verse 17, it says, this news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country. And we talked about the miracle happening and the news that spread in light of that miracle and what that means for our faith. Yeah, totally. And then I think a few things we can specifically take out from this part of the passage is what Jesus knows our needs before we even ask him. He feels our pain, right? And when Jesus does something in your life, it can inspire others' faith, right? And I think just those few things have inspired us in this passage. And those are just a couple of the things that we pulled out and can share together and share with you guys today. And so we felt awesome about it. You have any last things to say about this passage? No, it was a blessing. Yeah. And we also have a few questions for everybody watching at home. And the first one is this: why is it so significant that the Roman official was a Gentile? And what does it tell us about those who are newer to faith? Yeah, Jesus was just always in the business of breaking barriers and doing miracles for people that the others would not have expected, the Jews would never have expected him to do. And so what does him providing this miracle for the servant of a Roman say about Jesus?
Yeah, totally. Number 2, why is it so important to have a childlike faith? And in what ways have we lost that as adults?
Yeah, I think that's a good conversation to have for sure.
3, how does it build our faith to know that Jesus experiences or it has experienced human emotion? 4, in verses 11 through 17, we saw Jesus see the woman crying, and he was filled with compassion and knew her need without her saying it out loud. Tell about a time that Jesus met a need that you hadn't even asked him to help you with.
Yeah, I think all of us can tell a story about when we had a desire in our heart or we had a prayer in our heart and Jesus met that need before we could even verbalize it. And I think when we are able to share that, and I think this leads to the last question, when we're able to share what Jesus has done for us, whether we ask for the need or not, but sometimes even in those unspoken needs, it will inspire the faith of other people.
Yeah, totally. The last question, when Jesus healed the young boy in verse 17, it says the news spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country. When God does a miracle in our lives, it inspires others. Tell about a miracle God has done in your life that could inspire the faith of those around you.
Yeah, I think that would be a really good time in our groups to just be able to share what has God done and how can it build the faith of everyone in our group and how can that news spread and inspire others.
Totally.